Time talking to a lot of folks today, and I'm with the biggest bunch of spoon pluggers I guess I've ever been with. And I'm not an expert by any means, but we have been catching some nice stripers, and we've caught some pretty big fish, especially for this part of the country. In this area, in the chain of lakes we have here, stripers begin to die off about right around 30 pounds. And we don't have the depth and the cool water, the cold water. Summertime it gets kind of hot, and the surface temperature will get over 80 degrees. Sometimes these fish stress out and die, and it's called the squeeze. And if you don't have enough current, like we've had the drought and everything, I think it's kind of stressed these big fish out. We were catching a lot of big fish in June, and a lot of fish over 20 pounds. And I had Terry with me one day. We had a fantastic day on big fish. It was just, for this part of the country, I don't know how we could have done any better, but a lot of fish over 20 pounds. And my wife got one that weighed 31 pounds a few weeks ago. That was in June. June was a real good month, but the water level began to drop. So I think right now we're in kind of a stressed out condition in this area for the big fish. But if you're going to catch these stripers, you're going to have to realize that first of all, he's an open water fish, and he relates for the most part, most of the time in the summertime, he's going to be related to the features that are connected some way to the channel, whether it's a delta ridge on the channel, whether it's you've got a hump, or whether it's just a channel break line. He's going to be out from the shoreline, and you're going to have to run those break lines if you're going to catch these fish. Another thing to keep in mind is that most of the time when we run for the bass, we cut the mustard in the summertime. I don't know how fast you folks like to troll for the bass, but you have to move at a pretty good clip. But when you're fishing for the stripers, most of the time, even in the summertime, you don't run quite as fast for him. And I've done both. I've done the slow, the in-between, and the fast. Most of the time, you're going to run an in-between speed for him. Catfish are kind of slow. A lot of times you just run fairly slow for him. The bass, you ball the jack. But for the striper, you want kind of an in-between speed. On my boat, a lot of times I'm running about 2.5, 3 miles an hour. Now, if you run 2.5, 3 miles an hour in the summer for bass, you're probably not going to catch too many. But for the stripers, you're going to have to kind of keep it down just a little bit. Don't be flying around all over the place trying to catch these stripers. Check it out. It's simple enough. You can check it out. If you're not catching any, trolling the in-between speed, you can pick up the pace. And that might help you. One thing we found out too is that they, of course, they stock the stripers. He's a landlocked fish. He's a saltwater fish which spawns in fresh water. Most of the country doesn't successfully do that because the river stretches are not long enough. His eggs have to suspend in current for 72 hours once he lays his eggs. So the current cannot stop. You have to have current for 72 hours. Keeps the egg up in the water column, and then the egg hatches, and you've got your little striper. If the egg settles at the bottom, he dies. So there are only 2 or 3 systems in the whole country where he can successfully spawn, but he makes a spawning run anyway. But whatever, what you're going to have to do is troll these channel break lines, and you're going to have to remember that oftentimes on the striper you're going to have to run free to catch this fish. We bump once in a while, but a lot of times we're running free on the stripers. And I think I was talking to John earlier about this. You can run the break lines, but sometimes you want to run above the break line. You don't want to be, sometimes we bump the break line, sometimes you run above the break line. You have to check that out. You can fish beneath the stripers. If you've not fished for them a lot, you think, well, I'm going to have to be bumping, I'm going to have to bump the break lines all the time. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you want to run free. We catch a lot of fish running free. Most of the stripers we catch running free. And so right now, what we found is that they stock stripers in different parts of the lake. And so if you fish on road hiss, they stock the stripers around Castle Bridge. And then mid-lake, they stock stripers down there. They also stock them on the lower end. So you're dealing with 3 separate groups of fish. If you fish in the upper end, you've got a group of fish up there. If you fish the middle section, you have a group of fish there. You fish the lower end, you got a group of fish there. But wherever they are, more than likely they're going to be out in the open water. Now, I want to say this. This is beginning to get kind of late in the summer. And just about this time every year, when the bait fish begin to move up into the creeks, the striped bass will go with the bait fish. In the spring of the year, they make their spawning run. In the fall of the year, they follow the bait fish up into the creeks, and they follow the bait fish up into the headwaters. And early in the morning, sometimes you'll see some surface activity. Late in the evening, sometimes this time of year, you'll see some surface activity. If you boys fish on Road Hiss, and you're out there late in the evening, if you're fishing up Castle Bridge area, and you're up the river somewhere, kind of keep your eyes peeled late in the day. And there are big flats as you go on up the river above Castle Bridge. There are big flats, especially on the left-hand side. Lots of times the shad will be up on top of those flats, and late when the sun gets behind the trees, these big stripers will herd that bait fish up there, and they'll be busting on top. Don't ever pass that up. One of the mistakes that people make is they'll see that surface activity and they pass it up. They go and do something else. Don't pass that up. If you see water fly about this high up in the air, you stop. Go check that out, man. That's not a largemouth bass about that long. That's a striper bass as long as your leg. And what you want to do is you want to get over there. If you've got some kind of big topwater bait, I have an old preacher friend on Lake Hickory who takes a dowel rod, big piece of dowel rod about this big around, and he cuts him a piece of dowel rod about this long, and he paints it white, and then he paints a red head on it. And he goes to the hardware store and he buys these big screw things with a little hole in the end. I don't know what you call the thing, but anyway, he puts big hooks on those big old things he buys at the hardware store, and he takes the thing and gouges the nose of it out so that it'll pop when he jerks it. And he ties some bucktail on the rear hook, and he throws it, I don't know, he can throw it a long way. And he pops those big old dowel rods on top water. If you want to buy you some dowel rod and make you some topwater things, do it. A good thing to use is just a big old Cordell redfin. And you V-weight it. You don't, it's not a lot of jerking and hopping. That's a mistake most of the time. Stripers, you don't do a lot of jerking and hopping on stripers. You just V-weight that thing across the surface so it just makes a little V off the back. Any of you ever done that? Anybody? One brother? You just make a V-wake across the surface, and if he's there, he will kill it. And when he hits it, you hang on. Another thing you have to keep in mind too is when he hits the lure, don't you do anything until you feel the fish. Don't jerk just because he explodes on it, because a lot of times you'll miss it. When he explodes on the bait, wait till you feel the fish, and then you can set the hook on the fish. That's one thing. You can use bucktail jigs, spoons, whatever you want to do. But sometimes the smaller fish, a lot of times the schoolies will be on the surface, but the bigger fish will be underneath. And so that you can check the top, and then you can check underneath with a fish like that. So this time of the year, they can begin doing that schooling. It'll be schooling early in the morning and late in the evening. They'll run up the creeks, this kind of thing. I'm just trying to think, Terry, if there's anything else.
Well, there's that base brake line.
Yeah. Another thing too is that now we run the brake line on the main channel, but we run the base brake line a lot. This time of the year, you're going to have to run the base brake line quite a bit if you're going to catch these fish. And you just have to be patient. Another thing is that unless it's cloudy, unless it's rainy, you might have a hard time during the middle of the day. A lot of times in our lakes around here, for whatever the reason, I think it's a combination of watercolor and fishing pressure. But whatever the reason, whatever happens around here, a lot of times happens late. And so many times I've seen the last 30 minutes of light is when you'll catch your stripers. So if you go home at 7 o'clock in the evening, you can miss your striped bass. You have to stay until you can't see. I've had Terry out with me many times. You couldn't see anything. That's when we catch the fish. The lights go out, and there he is. And sometimes when they show up, they really have a way of showing up. There'll be a bunch of them. And So these are just some pointers for you. Hopefully you can find some of these big fish. We've been having a hard time lately. They've not been moving too good. Vic got a big one last week. Vic got one.
Thursday.
Was it Thursday?
Thursday.
Last Thursday, Vic got one that weighed 24. And then a couple weeks ago, I got one that weighed 14 and a half. But, you know, we're out in the open water. And we catch a lot of fish around 24 feet. But, you know, the base break line can be deeper than that. You just have to check and see where it is.
Yeah, they can't be afraid to run a 700 or 800 on wire.
No.
Don't be afraid to run a 700 or 800 on wire. You know, I mean, whatever you gotta run, don't say, well, gee whiz, I don't wanna run a 700 or 800 on wire. That pulls awful hard. That's too bad.
Yeah.
Hey, when you're running free, what are you talking about staying up off the bottom? 2 feet, 4 feet?
Well, just to give you an example, stripers will move a long ways, especially when they're active. Stripers will move a long way in the water column to take a bait. And a couple, 2-3 years ago, I was using live bait quite a bit for the stripers. And the last couple of years I haven't, but for a couple of years I used the big shad for the stripers. And what I found out is that you can be drifting drifting shad on flat lines without any split shot, just free line with a hook. And you can be drifting this bait over water that's 25 and 30 feet deep, and these stripers will come up and take that bait on the top. And so you have to check this thing out running free. Sometimes what we do is we try to stack our lures, run them at different depths just to see. You just have to check that out. Sometimes you've got to be real close. If he's really active, he'll move a good distance, but we've always got something up in the water column, way up off the bottom. Always have something up there. Or always check it out. Because what you'll do is you'll fish and you'll be bumping along on the bottom and bumping those break lines, and he'll be 3 feet above your lure. You'll be beneath him. You'll be under him. So you just have to do both. You have to bump for a while, then you run free, then you run out off the break line, run up in the water column, check that out, because there are days when they will come up quite a distance to take your bait. We've trolled big bucktail jigs, and we've had them come up. We can see them at times. We see them on the depth finder. And we've had them come up several feet. I don't know how many feet. Last summer, Terry and I were catching them. We were using a combination. But one rod, we had bucktail jigs. And these stripers, we were probably running 15 feet deep over anywhere from 30 feet to 24 feet. But we were running 15 feet deep with a bucktail. They come up and pop that bucktail. Well, they were downstairs. Here they come. Bang, they get it. So keep that in mind when you're working.
It's kind of like when the guys are running for the muskies, Jerry, when you run a 700 or 800 in the prop wash, right behind the motor, and then you got a rod in your hand and you're running that. It's basically the same thing. You're checking as deep as you can reach as far as the base break line or the channel break line, and then you're running the lure up in the water column right in the wake of the motor. It's the same thing.
Yeah, there's one other thing too that you might want to think about, and if you're working in the area and you find you're working and you find that there's a lot of bait in that area you're working, that's always a plus for you with the stripers. It may not make any difference with the largemouth bass and with the other fish, but with those striped bass, if you're working in an area, there's lots of bait fish in the area. Your chances improve with him. If you're in an area where there's very little bait fish, it seems like it's just a little more difficult to find him. But that's just something for you to think about. If you find a lot of bait, you probably have improved your chances quite a bit. They tend to follow bait quite a bit. And they tend to move a long distance. That's another thing too, because you can find them on a feature one day and the next day they're long gone. And right now that's what's happened to us. They're kind of long gone right now. We had them located on one particular spot on a channel break line and one cut in particular. And we hit 3 big fish on one cut one afternoon, and we hit some other big fish on down the break line. Just a short stretch. And just as soon as they came, it seemed that they were gone. They moved, and they can move a long way on you. So you just cover the water and keep some of these things in mind, and hopefully some of you will be able to find some of these big fish. There's some good fish, yeah,
In fact, Vic's fish came off the same feeder cut.
yeah,
Yeah, Vic's 24 pounder.
yeah.
When those stripers are not active and they're dormant, if you're walking the bottom and picking stuff, before they become active, just before, you'll pick them up walking the bottom. If they're free runner, you won't hit nothing, but when they do become active, I've seen them come all the way up 30 feet. But if they're not active, you gotta touch that bottom to trigger them, or they won't hit nothing.
Well,
That's why we said you gotta check it
You
off.
check it out.
You gotta check it off.
We don't run free all the time, we do both.
Sometimes you get 3 at a time, and that's a circus, let me tell you.
Yeah.
And they get active. You come through there, you got 3 rods out, you got 3 of
Is
them.
that true, Terry, that a striper's nothing but a Michigan carp with teeth?
About it, ask Steve after Ron is finished, and then we don't wanna keep everybody here every night, you know?
Yeah, another thing too is you don't want to, a lot of spoon pluggers, you know, you fishing for the bass. There's 2 things. Number one, your drag setting can't be really tight. Because if you hook a big fish, you'll break your line. Another thing is if you play them on the spool, if you like to thumb your spool for bass, you might not want to do that for the stripers. You might want to engage your spool for him unless you want a blister, or if you want your thumb pulled down under the crossbar, have him break your thumb, because he is a mean fish. And if you get one that weighs 25, 30 pounds, he's going to tear you up. And just kind of use a light drag. We've had people come down and fish with us, and we tell them that, and they won't listen. And next thing you know, their line's broken. And I had one of my brother-in-law who did that with me, and I had set the drag on his reel, and while I wasn't looking, he tightened it back down. And we were casting on the upper end of Lake Hickory, and he had a big striper take him, and it was 17-pound test. I just broke it like sewing thread. And so just remember that, you know, not too tight of a drag, and you're gonna have to just be kind of patient with him, because when he first takes the bait, he's gonna hit the trail, more than likely. He's a great fish. Okay, that's about all I've got.